COVID and geography, size, centrality and alienation. A seldom mentioned geographic issue in the coronavirus pandemic is the size, centrality and permeability of the countries in question. In the English-speaking world, the UK and the USA have the largest populations, 67 million and 327 million citizens, respectively, and are centrally located. In contrast, Australia and New Zealand are smaller, 25 million and 5 million people, respectively, and are located on the global periphery out in Oceania. In the USA in particular, states cannot decisively close their borders with other American states. Canada would seem to be somewhere between New Zealand and the USA. Canada's population is relatively large, with 50 million people, and Canada has a long border with the USA. Nevertheless, Canada seems somewhat geographically semi-peripheral, perhaps comparable to Australia. The American case in particular raises questions about scale and the response to the pandemic. It is often lamented that the US federal government abdicated its role in fighting the pandemic and devolved responsibility to the states. Yet Germany also has a federal form of government, and the development of COVID testing was left in the hands of the German states. At the state level, Germany ramped up testing rapidly while the USA floundered. It could be that regional responses can be effective if societies have the capacity for administrative efficiency at the local level. Unfortunately, that might only describe very few countries: Germany, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong. There might be another issue related to scale, which is alienation. Geographically vast societies with huge, diverse populations might tend to have greater levels of social and psychological alienation. Great size and ethnic diversity are things that the USA, Brazil and India have in common. Very large and diverse societies like Brazil and India might not be particularly individualistic, but their great scale might erode the social cohesion needed for coordinated action. American liberals have long gushed at what they perceive as the generous progressive welfare states of Scandinavia. But developed Western countries with relatively high societal investments like those in Scandinavia tend to be relatively small and ethnically homogeneous. In fact, there might hints that in the more rural areas of the USA, it is often the smaller, more homogeneous states that spend more per pupil in public schools. In Europe, mass immigration and the erasure of national borders by the European Union might eventually erode national identification to the detriment of social investment. What one might find in an urbanized mega-society is not so much individualism and freedom as alienation. Likewise, in large countries like Germany that are not particularly individualistic, there are now mass protests against precautionary measures. The protests are by an odd assortment of marginal groups who are seemingly unified only by their alienation and dissatisfaction with modern German life. Of course, protests are happening all over the world. There are anti-mask protests even in Japan, but they are small protests by fringe political figures. One might not expect anti-mask protest in Japan, and the protests are widely condemned by the Japanese public. Sociologically, Japan might have a strong commitment to consensus, with strong sanctions against those who threaten social harmony. Moreover, thanks to air pollution, a familiarity with epidemics and an ingrained religious ethos of purity, Japanese are already used to wearing masks, social distancing and frequent hand washing. The basis of the small anti-mask protest in Japan might not be a latent individualism, despite the Japanese protesters' complaint that their freedoms are being impinged upon. The rhetoric might be individualistic, but the true motive might be an underlying feeling of loss of community in a hyper-modern urban society that is economically down on its luck. In fact, a constant complaint in Japan seems to be that Japanese life has become the worst of both worlds, an alienating modern rat race that does not deliver on prosperity. Again, the point here is to look at cultural issues, namely, modern alienation, as a source of protest that is disguised behind the political language of individual rights. That alienation has its roots in geography, in particular, the sheer scale of a large, developed urban society. In the 2010s, South Korean television dramas became popular in Japan because the older generation of Japanese felt that Korean dramas embodied the old small-town values that Japanese have lost touch with. When old Japanese people begin to wax nostalgic about Korean culture, you know there is something is rotten in Tokyo.